There we go. So yes, today we're going to talk about marriage. We're going to look at the sociological definition of marriage. So if I happen to ask you for a definition of marriage, I don't want the one that dictionary.com has. I don't want the one that Google gives you when you search for a definition of marriage. We need the sociological definition of marriage when we are talking about sociology and how all of these social institutions connect to each other. Okay, so like I said, the definition of family that you have from from Monday, is the sociological definition of family. Let me see. Marissa, would you come and push this? Close it, please. I think the strings are back here, so if you don't mind walking in front of the camera for a second, if you will, because that's kind of getting me. Anyway, so, perfect. Yeah, you can do the other one too. Thank you. So here is the definition of marriage. We're going to do it in several parts. This is the sociological definition. Thank you. Sociological definition of marriage. Please keep in mind that these are what we need to use, since this is sociology class. Okay, so how many of y'all in here have been married or are married?
Was married.
You were married? You are?
Yeah, we just want to call it.
If that's what we want to call it? Well, I'm glad that you said that. We're going to look at what we might want to call it, right? Okay, because that's part of the definition.
Not divorced yet.
That's part of the definition. Okay, so the sociological definition of marriage starts out like this. It is a legal or social arrangement in which, how many people?
Or more.
Or more. We have to get the two or more. This is a sociological definition of marriage, just like we did a sociological definition of family. We have to be very, very general in our definition in that case, because yes, definitely we have to put the two or more, in which two or more people just a second, I gotta plug this in to make sure it doesn't die while I'm filming this. Is it alive? There we go. Okay, so two or more people. We have to throw the or more in there to fit as many individuals, as many examples of marriage in the world as possible. Two or more people have certain rights and privileges with each other. And are assumed, get this word assumed, to have sexual activity. They are assumed to have sexual activity. So legally or socially accepted is the place where we're going to start our discussion today. It's a legal or a social arrangement between two or more people. And that legal or social arrangement outlines what rights and privileges people have. Obligations and duties are also part of this. Rights, privileges, obligations, and duties to each other are part of that right and privilege comment there. And the people involved in the marriage are assumed to engage in sexual activity. What do you think? Does this look like a complete definition? Did we leave anything out? Did we leave anything out that you think should be in a definition of marriage?
They're supposed to have children. Are they not?
Are our marriages supposed to have children? Are they? Are they? There isn't anything about children, but maybe there is a right or an obligation that has to do with that. Families had that in the description, right? In the sociological definition of families, it said you're supposed to care for young, right? Here, does every marriage have to have children? What if you're 65 widow and a 75 widower and you get married? You supposed to have children? I guess you
Work together economically? You don't have to?
Well, okay, good. So work together economically. You're taking those phrases from the family definition. So these words here, I don't have another color marker today, so it's not going to be as easy to see what I'm highlighting. But those words there, rights, privileges, obligations, and duties. And also, the financial part, too, is going to come in with this word. It's going to come in with that word. And the financial part might be children, because not necessarily in our society anymore, but years ago, decades ago in our society and in many societies worldwide, children are an economic benefit. Children can work the land if you are a farmer or an agrarian society. Children can bring exchange of goods and services when they get married. Because some places have a social arrangement where the, well, I'll go ahead and talk about the word arranged.
Really?
An arranged marriage. An arranged marriage often happens when adults in charge of two people decide who will marry whom.
Are you just talking about marriage in a sociology way, or like in like today's society?
Sociology does examine today's society, yes.
When you say two or more people, you're like polygamy. I think you could only be married to one person.
Okay, we're going to talk about the two or more people part, and you're right. So keep that in mind, and that's another reason why we have this. Your comment specifically about the two or more people, I don't think you can be married to more than one person at a time. You're speaking from a socialization process that occurred in the United States, where you're absolutely right. We have laws, we have rules, we have norms. We don't even have to talk about the laws and the rules that are on the books. We have norms about about what we feel comfortable doing, right? And what we feel is shameful or not shameful regarding sexual activity with people. And so, yeah, we have rules that most of us follow, that you're supposed to marry one person and one person only at a time. And if you don't want to be married to that person anymore, you need to be divorced before you are with somebody else, right? That's our general norm that we follow. It doesn't always happen that way, right? Newsflash. Doesn't always happen that way. But that this definition, if you are applying your ideas about what marriage is based on your socialization process, that's an automatic thing. That's a typical thing that happens. That it's not wrong in any ways. But we do have to zoom out on the more macro scale, a global scale, because that's why this definition is written the way that it is. It's a legal or a socially acceptable arrangement between two or more people, because of the word polygamy, like you said, with rights, privileges, obligations, duties. And so since Amanda was asking, what about economic cooperation? Well, let's talk about the rights and privileges, obligations, and duties, and also the legality, because economics comes into that, right? So, yeah, and we'll talk about different kinds of marriages. Arranged marriages, for instance, are very common in the world, very common, where somebody with authority in the family line of the people who are going to be married, somebody with authority decides with somebody else who has authority in the other family unit who's going to get married, when, how old, where they'll live, and that kind of stuff. We don't have those norms for marriage in that way here in the United States. It sounds odd to us. Do y'all have something? Fanny?
Oh no, I was just saying it would make life easier.
Arranged marriage would make life easier? Hold that thought. Maybe it would.
That show, it's like...
I just asking before you got here if anybody had seen the show Married at First Sight.
Yeah,
Is that the show?
Yeah.
Married at First Sight is where a sociologist looks at two people's backgrounds and matches them, and says, and they agree ahead of time, we'll get married right away, and it's like a year-long experiment. And anyway, so maybe it does. Maybe data shows that it's easier. I'm not here to give you any kind of personal advice for your lifespan. However, we're looking at marriage in a sociological way, which is much more objective than a Disney movie. Okay? Much more objective than it works in Disney movies. Okay, so let's talk about the legal or the social arrangement part. And we can use arranged marriage as an example. So for instance, I am not teaching cultural anthropology this semester, but I love teaching that topic. And one of my favorite groups of people to talk about when I am teaching cultural anthropology are the Maasai people in East Africa. I love the Maasai so much. I love all of their food ways and their habits and everything that they do. They're some of the most gorgeous people on the planet in my opinion, which doesn't matter really outwardly. But the Maasai have an arranged marriage pattern that I just wanted to use as an example here. So they have a social arrangement. In the Maasai, there is no legal system where a government sets laws and you have a courthouse and you have to record things with the courthouse, or get somebody to say, with the power vested in me by Maasai land, you're married. You don't have to do anything like that. What happens among the Maasai is somebody who's in the groom's bloodline and somebody who's in the bride's bloodline, whoever the most powerful people are in those two bloodlines, get together and they decide who the best people are to get married. Who the best bride is for this groom, who the best groom is for this bride. And one of the ways that they do that is through the exchange of cattle and goats. Cattle and goats is their economic base. Cattle is money. So if your bloodline if you want a female in my bloodline to marry a male in your bloodline, you probably have chosen me because I've got really fertile looking females in my bloodline who are going to fill the obligation of having babies. And I don't have quite so many cows as you do, so I might be more willing to trade my daughter for cows to your bloodline, and that way we will make this arrangement. And my daughter knows her son. They know each other, but there hasn't been like a courtship, there hasn't been dating, there hasn't been anything like that. And in their socialization process, from birth until that point when they're married, they have been reared with the knowledge that this is how marriage will take place for them. So I'm not saying they're not a little scared or a little jittery like somebody might be, or that in psychology class you might talk about being human nature. But in their socialization process, they are fully aware that somebody up 2-3 generations from them is going to decide who their marriage partner is later on. And it's going to be based on cow exchange, essentially. I'm really simplifying it. But arranged marriages are extremely common in the world, and they are usually based on economic exchange, the best business exchange that can happen. Typically, that business arrangement is done on a handshake kind of deal. And the handshake is the marriage. And the contract is the babies that come from the marriage. But there is no legal arrangement that you have to go through in order for the marriage to take place. So that's why this word or, legal or socially acceptable, is in there. Would that work in our society for Amy's family to get together with my family and we decide this son and this daughter need to be married and we just set up house for them and move them in, and as soon as they have babies we're like, yep, they're officially married now? Would that work for us in our society? No, that's not our norm. That's not our norm. In our society, this is a key word when it comes to marriage. Key word. When it comes to a lot of stuff, it's a key word. But specifically with marriage and family, we're talking about legal being a key word for the norms in the United States. We have to have the or socially acceptable arrangement words in the definition, the sociological definition of marriage, but in the United States, the legal condition is the big deal.
So
What do I mean by that? Why am I saying marriage is a legal arrangement? What's legal about it? You have to have the court documented. It's what? It's a certificate. It's a piece of paper. How, anybody know, like, what are these certificates we're talking about? The marriage license. So, but even before the marriage license, is there something exchanged between the two people that is a legal situation?
what do you mean? A ring?
A ring. The ring. You don't have to watch too many. The ring is a legal exchange. And just watch a couple of episodes of Judge Judy if you don't think it's a legal exchange. The ring is a legal exchange where the custom is in our society, a man gives a woman a ring. The ring has value, right? It's not a ring from a gumball machine. It's a ring that's supposed to have value. That exchange is supposed to be the woman's promise to marry him and provide him with children. It's an old-timey tradition that's part of our legal system today. You break up, you don't get married, you know, he gets the dishwasher, he gets the clothes washer, and you get the dryer, and you break up, you are obligated to give him back his ring because that was you took it with the promise of marrying him, you're breaking the contract, you give it away, you give it back. And if you don't do it, you go in front of Judge Judy and she'll say, give him back the ring, and she won't even be that polite about it. Right? Yes?
So all these women pawning rings, they're doing it wrong?
Yeah, like the
Isn't there like a
ex-fiance, if you pawn the ring, the ex-fiance has a legal case against you that he will win if he can prove, if he can prove that you pawned it and you didn't just, oops, I dropped it in the Arkansas River, it was a mistake. Right? Yeah, Mallory.
So common law marriage.
Okay, let's get to that in a second. We will talk about common law, but let's get to that in just a second when we talk about like law marriage instead of common law, but you're right. Okay, because there are these different situations, but still the word law is in there, right? Okay, so the very first legal transaction that typically happens with a marriage is the exchange of the ring, and the ring is a contract. Most people don't think of it that way because we watch Disney movies, but that's what it is, okay? Then the next phase, when you're actually getting close to the marriage, because I think marriage licenses,
30 days.
yeah, is it 30 days? I was going to say it was 90.
I think
So if you set the date, you have to go to the courthouse. How much is it these days? Anybody know? 80 bucks? Something like that. It's 60, 80 bucks. Yeah, you go to the courthouse where the marriage is going to take place and you say, we're going to get married within 30 days. I thought it was 60, but anyway, there's like a period of time. And you buy the marriage license. There's a legal contract. You've registered yourself. It'll put it in the newspaper. There's a public announcement. This person and this person bought a marriage license together.
Why do they do that?
Then, because for many reasons. Let's continue. Why do they do that? For many reasons. Legality is the name of the game in the United States. Legality. You can't just go out with your lover and climb Pinnacle Mountain and both of you scream north, south, east, and west, I marry you! And climb back down with your dog as a witness and tell everybody around, we just got married on the top of Pinnacle Mountain. It doesn't work that way. Legal is the name of the game. So the ring is the first legal thing, the marriage license is the next legal thing. Then you can't just go get a marriage license and ask your sociology teacher, can you marry us? You have to get somebody who's legally able, legally authorized to marry you. They have to pay for their license to be legally authorized and they have to keep it up. So keep up that license periodically. And so every time you renew that license, that person who's legally able to marry people has to buy another license to be able to marry people. And so you have to find that person. Most of the time, preachers, most of the time, have that license, that state license to be able to marry someone. And you have to typically pay them a fee to be the presider of your marriage, because they are a government official who is doing it, even if his name is Reverend Ted, he has to be a government official as far as marriage license goes in order to be able to marry you. You have to typically pay him a fee, even if he says just a donation will be fine, and he doesn't say it's $50. Some people say it's $50. Some people say it's $500. Some people say it's whatever, donate something, please. And we'll take it that way. But you have to find somebody who's legally authorized to marry you. You have to have witnesses. You have to do that. And then isn't it 30 days after you do that that you have to go to the courthouse again and register that, and that's when you get your certificate.
Yeah, you send that in and then they mail you back the
You send it in. You don't have to physically take it, but you can mail it in, and they send you back the certificate, and bingo, you are legally married. And here's where the rights, privileges, obligations, and duties come in. Okay? What, y'all have some questions?
No, she said that's too much work, and I said I don't.
Oh. Is it too much work? Lots of people have been doing it for lots of times. That's the norms in our culture, right? We can't climb on the top of it's not socially acceptable for us to climb on the top of Pinnacle Mountain and do it by ourselves. We have to do it this way, okay? So legal is the name of the game. Mallory asked the question about common law. Mallory, can you look up online for me, please, whether we have common law marriage in Arkansas anymore? Will you look it up, please? I think our common law statute expired. States do not have to recognize common law marriage, but common law marriage, just the word law, is a legal situation.
It says Arkansas never recognized common law.
Oh, I thought we did. Okay. Florida does not.
Louisiana does. That's where
Louisiana does because it has Napoleonic law. I think Colorado. Anyway, there is no obligation for a state or county or any place to recognize common law marriage. But in states that have statutes for it, there's usually like a period of time. If you have lived with someone, cohabitated, here's another word we're going to talk about today, cohabitate.
It says if you gain the privilege in another state, then they do recognize it
Here,
So, like,
okay.
if you're living somewhere like Arizona or somewhere.
So it's a period of time so common law marriage typically has a period of time like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, where you have cohabitated, this word that I've written on the board way over there. Cohabitation is living, is like your grandma says, it's shacking up. Okay, so you're shacking with somebody if you're cohabitating with them. If you have a roommate and y'all are sharing bills, but you are roommates, you are not cohabitating. Cohabitating is a concept where you are living together and playing house. You are playing like. You have legal rights, privileges, obligations, and duties with each other, but you haven't gone through the legal arrangement that says on paper you have rights, privileges, obligations, and duties for each other. You have a common agreement that you're going to live together as though you are married, but you are not. And some states, in 5, 7, 10 years, if you have had that period of time where you live together, here's where the economics part comes in. The assumption is all of your income for both of those people have gone into the same pool at least some of the time in that time frame. And the house that you've been paying for is equally yours and equally mine. The house, the utilities, the car, the camper, the whatever the assets are that you have accrued in that period of time, the assumption is you have 50-50 split on those assets. Whereas if you have a roommate that you live with for 3 or 4 years, half of your roommate's car does not eventually belong to you when y'all decide not to live together anymore, right? But that's one of the reasons why marriage is a legal arrangement, because the rights, privileges, obligations, and duties associated with that are that every asset, all of the money that I earn and you earn, are equally for both of us. All of the, his truck and my car might as well be his car and my truck, right? Just because we typically drive those on a daily basis. So legal is the name of the game because of the economic connection between family and the macro scale social institution of economy. Okay? Questions? Okay. No? Okay. So, legal or social arrangement. I told you about the Maasai because that's just one of thousands of examples where all it is a social arrangement. You don't have all the stuff that you don't want to go through, like pay for a marriage license and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we have the legal or social arrangement. It must be in, those two words must be in a sociological definition of marriage. Okay, so let's talk about the two or more people for a second. Let me start with asking this. In the United States, how many people are involved in a marriage? Is that your answer?
No.
Two?
It depends on where you live.
Depends on kids, families.
It depends on, okay, y'all are touching on it, the kids and families. There's the answer. So in the United States, the legal arrangement only allows two people and two people only to enter into what we legally call a marriage. However, for the two people who have been married before in this room, along with me, answered correctly that there are never just two people in that relationship, unless, because he has family and she has family, and they're always in the marriage too, those families, and then if children are produced, the children are in the marriage too, right? So even though two people are legally bound, especially if children are produced, then there's another legal bind. Even if the marriage dissolves, you still have that legal connection through the offspring. So, and offspring are usually the assumed thing to happen. Among the Maasai, for instance, you have an obligation to have children. You and your spouse have an obligation to have children, many children. It is seen as a wonderful thing for you to have many, many children. It's your obligation, it's your duty. With those children come rights and privileges, work, wealth, those kinds of things. Also, marriages are assumed to have sexual activity. Where do babies come from? Bingo. Right? So you're assumed to have sexual activity. So even in the United States, where the legal arrangement only allows two people at a time to enter into a legally binding marriage, there's never just two people in that marriage unless you're both only children, orphans, and sterile, I guess, and have no friends. So you'd have to be like on a desert island, with no family, no friends, no children, in order for there to just be two people involved in the...
But really, you can't even do that because don't you have to have some sort of witness for your marriage?
Oh, there you go. You're throwing the legal aspect into it with these witnesses. So you're stuck shacking up if you're on that desert island, right? Okay. All right. So, yes. So the two or more people, I heard Krista say it earlier. She said this word. Polygamy. What's this word mean? Multiple spouses. I'm glad that you wrote it or said it that way. Multiple spouses. When I say the word spouse, is a spouse a male or a female?
Either or.
Either or. So you're right to say that polygamy is multiple spouses. Sorry, I left the S off. Because there's two types of polygamy. One of them is called polygyny. This is the one we're most familiar with. This is where a husband has multiple wives simultaneously. What does the word simultaneous mean?
At the same time.
All at the same time. So we're not talking about a husband has a first wife, gets divorced, has a second wife, gets divorced, has a third wife, gets divorced. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a socially approved of arrangement, which would have to be part of the macro scale norms of the society where you are. It would have to be probably part of the macro scale morality that the religion establishes for that society. But in your socialization process, you would learn as a woman growing up or as a man growing up, you would learn that this is the socially acceptable and or legal also arrangement. So if right now some of you are saying, I could never do that, or jealousy would get so much in the way, or I couldn't share this or I couldn't share that, you grew up with a socialization process that taught you that through everything that you experienced. If you grew up in a culture that had this as the norm, then you would learn this. And I'm not saying that it would be easy as pie, but you would have been trained through your socialization process not to mind sharing, not to mind or ignore or suppress jealousy or whatever the complaints are or the opposition is to this kind of thing. That's okay.
What's the woman one?
The woman one is, thank you, I hadn't written that
I
yet.
don't think I've ever heard it.
The woman one is polyandry. And gyn means woman, like a gynecologist is a woman doctor. Andro means man. So polyandry is a wife with multiple husbands simultaneously. Usually, polyandry and polygyny are linked to the economic situation in a place. Usually polygyny has economic requirements that the husband must be able to fully support each wife in an equal manner before he is allowed to have more than one wife at a time. In Islam, for instance, that's what the requirement is. In the Quran, there are rules about polygyny. You can have up to 4 wives, but not more than 4 wives in the Quran. Most people don't opt to do that. But if you do opt to do that, you have to be able to prove legally that you can support each wife with equal lifestyle before you're able to take that second wife or the third wife or the fourth wife.
And is there anything more broad, like men can have wives, they can have husbands, or is this...
Yes, there are more broad things like that, which you can, where it's called multiple marriage or what's the word? Polyamorous marriages. Confusing. But yeah, that's a little more deep into than what we're going to get into in intro class. Yeah. So polyandry is often a result to often an answer to extremely impoverished conditions, because who's the provider and who's the caretaker? Caregiver?
The caregiver's the woman.
Caregivers tend to have that gender role as a woman, and males tend to be the provider. So in extreme impoverished situations, you can see polyandry sometimes because having more than one man to maintain a household or bring in income in whatever form that looks like. It doesn't necessarily have to look like money. Often this is a very reasonable economic solution to poverty, because also a wife is only having so many children in her lifetime. If you had 3 men with 3 wives, you'd have 3 times as many children as if you had 1 wife with 3 husbands. And children are cheap, or are they expensive? Expensive, right? So this would be an answer to, and there's other examples too, but many examples are like a social answer to poverty. It helps people with economic uplift. Yes?
And isn't there like some of the religion that encourages that, but it's still going today?
Yes, there's some. Well, you mean like other than the Islam example that I gave you, like Islam? Yes, it allows this. I won't say it encourages it. It allows this.
Yeah, like I guess Mormon.
Okay, yeah. So there are some cultures, some religious beliefs that yes have a focus on one or the other of these. Without the economic focus, it's more like an internal focus. Yeah, that happens. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why we have to have the 2 or more people here, because not every culture has monogamy, which is the 2-person. This word monogamy Usually we use this word monogamy to mean that you're sexually exclusive with someone, but technically this word means marriage. It means marriage of two people and only two people, is what this typically means. We link it more to sexual activity, but the word monogamy is one marriage, whereas this is multiple marriages. Okay. So the rights, the privileges, the obligations, and the duties are different from one culture to the next. In the United States, somebody was asking about, Amanda asked about financial cooperation, or economic cooperation, because in the family description, economic cooperation was one of the bullet points, right? You had to have that, or family members had that with each other. In the United States, the legal condition of marriage absolutely does obligate the spouses. They have a duty to each other financially. That does not mean that my husband has a duty to work and bring money in from the outside. That means that he has a duty, if he's not, to do some kind of economic uplift or some kind of social uplift for us in the household if I'm the one bringing in money from the outside. Those are the norms that go with a marriage, right? We drew a picture of families on the board the other day and said this is the provider and this is the caregiver. Well, the caregiver has a ton of unpaid work that needs to be done. So if in a marriage we decide one of us is not going to do any outside work, well then you're going to get the big share of the unpaid work in the household. Is typically the arrangement, right? So you have also an obligation that if you are earning money, you are not supposed to go into so much debt, because your debt on your credit card and your debt at the casino and your debt all of these places, because we are legally tied, I'm obligated to that debt. So marriage is a legal arrangement, and it means that the creditors will come after you too. You co-sign for a car, or even if you don't co-sign for a car, if it's your husband and he buys a car and he's the only one who signs it and he starts defaulting on the payments, your credit is tanking also.
Yeah, I had to pay my ex-husband, well, now he's my ex-husband, I had to pay his past child support for his daughter because he never paid it. I had to take it out of my income tax.
There we go. Okay, so it was your ex-husband. He had children from a previous relationship. He was obligated for child support. You were legally linked to him, even though now he's your ex-husband. You were saddled with some of that debt because his debt is your debt when you have the legal bond of marriage, or when you have the common law bond also. The court will see to it. So there's a good example. It doesn't have to be your Visa credit card. It can even be your child support. Yeah. So anyway, marriage is a legally binding thing. Sexual activity is assumed, but it is not a necessity in a marriage. When you look around worldwide, some cultures don't even have anything called a marriage. There is no obligation, legal obligation or any of these rights, privileges, and duties that are binding at all. Some cultures have arranged marriages where maybe an individual himself, I'll say himself, maybe there's a 75, 80-year-old man who needs someone to take care of him in his old age as he is dying. And so he will find a poor family who needs to get their daughter out of their house because she eats and they are poor, and she's, of marriage age, and so maybe that family and that man who needs a caregiver will arrange for a marriage, and maybe you're 15, and your husband that is arranged for you is 75, and your obligation and duty is not this, it's taking care of an elderly person as they die. So it just depends on the norms, it depends on the standards, it depends on the assumptions, the social acceptability of arrangements in the area where you were born, where you went through your socialization process. I saw some of y'all wrinkling your noses up when I suggested that a 15-year-old would marry a 75-year-old, and the obligation would be to be a CNA for that person. But this is a very reasonable economic link between marriages, and why, a minute ago I said that they exchanged cows as an economic reason to marry. So arranged marriages are extremely common in the world, extremely common, and it's only assumed that there's going to be sexual activity, not a requirement. Not a requirement. Sometimes the obligations and the duties include having children, and it has to have this to have children. But sometimes the obligations and the duties mean you're going to nurse me through my ending phases of cancer or
And
something.
then get all my money when I die.
Yes, and then you are my heir, because if we are legally married, even if you are 60 years younger than I, when I die, here's that benefit. You can put up with this obligation that maybe is not pleasant for you, but you're doing it because of the economic benefit that you give. What do y'all think? Questions? Questions? Nothing? I don't think I asked you if there was anything missing from this definition of marriage. I should have asked y'all that at first.
You did.
I did? And none of you cold-hearted people said that these people should love each other?
No.
Nobody said love should be part of marriage?
It never is.
Well, should it be? How does love work? Let's look at the way that love works out
You can learn to
for
love
us.
someone.
You can learn to love someone. I like that
I married
statement.
my husband because he was going into the military and we were pregnant with our second kid and the financial stability.
Financial
That's all.
Yeah, but is that what kindergarten kids are learning right now during their storybook reading time? What are kindergarten kids learning during their storybook reading time in the United States? That what the norm is? That you should love them.
Change your aspect on it.
Yeah, that you're going to meet somebody one day, and I teach over in a very rural area away from this main campus where you have a lot of young people who come from really evangelical Christian households, and they've been taught in their religious experience that God created them and one other person in life that are supposed to meet, and your paths will meet, and it will be happily ever after. And so if in high school you are so madly in love with your boyfriend or girlfriend, well, clearly that's a sign that this is the person
Your
and
soulmate.
that you're your soulmate, and you are supposed to marry them because God has a plan for you. I have many students tell me this sincerely, and I am a little
Worried about
jealous. No, I'm jealous of them. I love that outlook. That is such a sweet and beautiful way of thinking, honestly, that they learned in their socialization process. I'm jealous of that naive point of view. But I want us to think about our behaviors for just a second on the micro scale. Back in chapter 3, 4, I don't remember when it was, we were talking about how we have different scripts that we follow from different scenes in a play that we go through on a daily basis. Y'all remember the dramaturgical analysis of life? Let's look at the part that we play as individuals, and I don't need anybody to confess anything right now, but let's look at the way we behave with people who we say we love compared to the way that we behave with people who we don't know very well at all. So, you've had a hard day. Well, first, before the hard day, let me ask you, how many of you have ever thought, I know that just 3 of us in this room are or ever have been married, but how many of you have ever thought that you were in love? Okay, so many more hands. Many more hands go up, and probably some of you just aren't raising your hands. So we thought we were in love. Look at what your behavior was when you thought you were in love, especially right early into the situation. Were you productive, active citizens? Were you good for daily obligations and duties, or were you in la la land?
Carefree.
La la land?
Didn't have anything to worry about. No
Yeah.
bills whenever I
Yeah.
was in love.
When you were in love, bills that were due didn't matter.
I mean, like, I
And
didn't
when
really
and
have
when you were in love, you would lose long tracks of time, and oh, my sociology test was due. I didn't even think about it because he's so wonderful. I've been happier. So wonderful. And lose hours of time just thinking about how wonderful each of us are. And then how long does that last?
Until
Lots of you said that you thought you'd been loving for 3 months.
That's when they start showing their true colors.
so they start getting more
Oh, true colors. Okay, so wait a minute. So are you saying,
Infatuation equals
so are you saying that if the script of our daily life is infatuation or love, then we ignore part of the script during that scene in our life movie is that we ignore things that otherwise in other people would really annoy us? So, and when I say things like, how many of you have to have the toilet paper this direction instead of this direction,
maybe.
right? Or how many of you have to squeeze the toothpaste at the very end to get it out, or you just squeeze that sucker right in the middle, right? These are the things that I'm talking about. That when you're, like Thumper said, or was it Bambi, the Twitter-pated phase? You know the movie Bambi? They're Twitter-pated, they're infatuated. So during that phase of our script, that infatuation phase, even things that would annoy us about our sister, about our brother, about somebody else, don't annoy us about that person. And so you said they show their true colors. I'm not sure if I agree with that. Because where were your true colors?
That's what I said, on both ends.
On
they
both
show their
sides.
true
But
colors.
also, probably our true colors were there all the time, but it wasn't noticed because we were blinded by this infatuation feeling. And whether it's 2 weeks or 3 months or 6 months or however long, that infatuation feeling does wear off. And like you said, when bills are due, that infatuation feeling, does it turn to a polite request for your half of the rent?
No.
What does it turn into?
An impolite request.
That's very diplomatic. It turns into a viciously impolite request for the rent, most often. Because the word I love you is both sides of the coin. Major infatuation where you can't do anything wrong, and everything you do annoys me and I hate your face. Right? So think about it. So now here we are to the bad day. You've had a bad day. You have a husband, wife, lover, whoever at home, and you're going home to them. It's a rainy day. Think about when was the rain so terrible? On Monday, cold and rainy. I had to stop at the grocery store on the way home, so it's a perfect example. I was like, oh, I have to stop at the grocery store, and I need to get gas, and I was just grumpy. And it was a bad day. It was a long day. I had tons of meetings that I had to go to. And I couldn't, I would call my husband and see if he could go to the grocery store for me. And he wasn't answering his phone. Frustrated. I stopped and I got out at Kroger and I got the stuff that I needed to get. And the checkout guy said to me, "Did you find everything okay? How was everything?" And I was very polite and nice to him. I don't know him. I don't even know which him it was when I go back into that Kroger. I don't know which checker it was. I was like, yes, thank you. I mean, I didn't, just say, God bless you, I love you. I didn't say that to him. But I said, yes, thank you, and I was polite. And I withheld my frustration. I withheld my grumpiness. I withheld the fact that my toes were cold because my shoes got wet coming in the rain. I withheld all that. And being Monday night, I got home. And don't you think somebody could hear your car in the driveway? And don't you think somebody could see the lights pull in the driveway? And don't you think they could remember that you said you needed bananas and bread? And don't you think they could have turned off the Monday night football game for just enough time to carry in a couple of bags of groceries when I've also got my briefcase and my purse and everything else and it's raining outside?
Is your husband still
They don't think about it.
But I love him. No, it's not just a female behavior. It's not just a female behavior. We tend to, thank you, we say I love you to somebody. And aren't they supposed to put up with our crap? They're supposed to put up with our crap because we say I love you.
You legally obligated that.
You're legally obligated to turn off Monday Night Football and come and carry in
No,
groceries?
we put up with each other's crap.
But love is actually an emotion that some societies in history, ancient Greece is one of them that I'm going to use as an example here. Love is an emotion that has literally been outlawed in countries like Greece, ancient Greece, like during Aristotle's time, where marriage was already a legal arrangement. Our Western culture that we live in today is based off ancient Greek culture. So in ancient Greece, marriage was a legal situation. They had a whole bunch of rigmarole to go through. And the ancient Greeks actually outlawed marriages that were formed on the basis of love because they were so volatile, they broke up quickly, they resulted in not macro scale wars, but they resulted in wars and civil unrest. So marriages were only allowed on the basis of some kind of economic reason, some kind of logical economic exchange. Love is not something, of course, that you can outlaw in the human condition. But if you were going to have a relationship based on love, according to ancient Greek norms, you could, but it would be with somebody you were having an affair with and not not your spouse. Because they wanted marriages. The rationale for making that law was they wanted marriages that were stable over time, so that they would have a society that's stable over time.
I don't know how they manage that.
I don't know how they manage that, but do you hear people today talking about here's my air quotes again, the breakdown of the American family? And a lot of times people relate that to a religious reason, like falling off of religious morals or something. But it's much more about economics. Our social structure is much more about economics. When there's a breakdown of the American family, usually we're talking about divorce rates and who gets the kids. And then females get the kids and feminization of poverty. And there's a drain on the social tolls of, the government has to put in housing vouchers and WIC cards. What does WIC stand for? Women, infants, and children. There's not a MIC equivalent. So all of this is linked. And even though this doesn't say you have to have children, if children are produced, they are legal also when they're produced here. What time is it?
Gotta divide them up.
So they are legal also. Have you heard, I know you've heard this word, but you might not know that it is a legal term in law books at the UALR Law Library. The word bastard. The word bastard, of course, we use as a negative thing usually for men. We'll call a man a bastard if we don't like what they've done as a colloquial bad word. But the word bastard is a technical word. It's a legal word that refers to a child who's been born out of what's called wedlock. Wedlock is marriage. Wedlock is a legal lock. You are tied to that person. So a bastard is a child that Maury Povich is very interested in. You have to go get a paternity test and reveal it on TV, right? That's a legal term for a child who was born to someone who was not married to the father.
Born or conceived?
Born. That's why many people, while you're in labor, get married while you're in labor, right? Because then there's far less legal gymnastics that you have to go through to have that child have a claim on the father's inheritance, right? It's about like inheritance. And that also means that if you're married to someone legally and you conceive a child with somebody else on the side, that child is legally the person you're married to. It is legally his child.
I had a friend that had a baby by her husband was in the military. She had a baby, she got pregnant by somebody else. And legally, the kid was his.
Yes, that's how it works. Yeah, don't be surprised. That's how it works. The marriage means that you are legally tied, and anything you produce, slavery's over, but you own the children. ownership is a slavery word that still applies to offspring when you are married.
And it was no sign in the birth certificate because she was married to him. Like,
Yes, there was no choice. Yeah, if you're married to someone and you're in labor, you can't tell the nurse, don't put my husband's name on the birth certificate. You can't say that. They're legally obligated to put the...
because she
Yeah,
was married.
this is, yeah, and that is, that's in the arrangement of the legal arrangement of marriage, because that protects the children. If something happens to the father and there's not any income anymore and he gets SSI or something, they still have a claim on that. They still have inheritance. They do all of those legal obligations, the rights, privileges, obligations, and duties. They, they are linked to the parents' health insurance benefits or life insurance benefits or any of those kinds of things. Without, if there's not a will when somebody dies, the people who are legally the children of that individual have to wait a little while for the court to make sure there's no debtors or anything. It's called probate. But if there's not a will, if you are the legal child, you have the strongest claim on what might be left behind, the finances that might be left behind after that parent dies. What'd you say?
That's how Cersei's son was able to take the throne.
Was it? I haven't studied Xerxes in a long time,
No,
but...
Cersei from
Oh.
Game of Thrones.
Oh, Cersei from Game of Thrones. Pardon me. I thought we were talking about, like, ancient Egypt here.
Okay. He was her brother's son.
Yeah.
I mean, it was her
So that, yeah,
but-
that's about bloodline, which we really haven't talked much about. But even in marriage, if you adopt somebody, like one person, if you're married, one of the people can't want a child and adopt them without the other one's consent. So, because both of them are going to be put on the birth certificate of that adopted child too. Right? So anyway, yeah. That's how it works.
So yeah, you can cheat on your husband, get pregnant, and still make him take care of the baby.
Well, I'm sure there's ways now to take him to court.
Yeah, but there are ways to take to court to get...
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there are ways to take to court to find out. However, it's going to cost the husband to prove it, right? Because the legal, you were saying earlier, this sounds like way too much trouble, all these legal things that you have to go through to get married to begin with. But it's way cheaper and way less trouble to do it this way than to try to prove it later. Way more expensive to try to prove it later. Okay, so somebody take some good pictures of this for me, please. And